What's up everybody, Z155 here, and today I'm just going to cut right to the chase. I'm not enjoying TFT set 11, and I'm going to talk about why. I want to preface everything by saying that I have been a TFT player since set 1, and a hardcore grinder since set 2. I've peaked masters in multiple sets, and take TFT very seriously. I'm making this video seemingly out of nowhere because of my love and passion for the game. I want nothing but the best for it, and because of that, I feel the need to make this video now if only so I can get my thoughts out there. I of course want to clarify that I intend no ill will towards the dev team for TFT, and I'm levying these criticisms from the perspective of a die-hard fan of their product. To start off, the set mechanic of encounters so far has been handled very poorly. Riot Mort, who is one of the greatest Leave devs of all time, had this to say about encounters. Encounters are one of the healthiest versions of variants that we have in the game, because all they do is move the line equally for everyone. Encounters adjust only the core path of the game, and that's a good thing. I disagree fundamentally with this description of encounters, because although many of the encounters are seemingly innocuous, tons of the encounters are massively game-altering and affect every player in the lobby vastly differently. For example, what happens if you get the Yorick encounter late in stage 3 that allows you to roll for 1 gold for the next 3 turns, when you're trying to play around 4 costs? If there are others in the lobby playing around 3 cost reroll comps, clearly the reroll player is going to benefit far more from the power given by this encounter due to the game context, even though both players are getting the same benefit on paper. The same is true of the reverse, where if the Kha'Zix encounter that reduces the cost by XP for 1 for the rest of the game appears in early stage 4, then any player playing around high cost unit strategies is going straight to level 9 way faster than they normally would, and 3 cost rerollers are left stuck wondering what they should do. These are not the only examples of this problem either. Almost every encounter has numerous game contexts that impact how useful they are, which directly lead to some players being able to use them better than others, regardless of their skill level. Another huge byproduct of this is the visibility of the RNG. In the aforementioned Kha'Zix example, if a player has been scouting and sees there are players who are going fast 9 when they're trying to play a reroll comp when the encounter appears, they'll feel awful because they know the game has simply decided that they do not get to win that game. This type of sweeping, game-wide, match-altering RNG is precisely the type of randomness that stings the most for players, because it often leads to ugly scenarios where it feels like there's nothing these players can do to improve their situation. Additionally, because there's no way to know what an encounter is going to be before it appears, it's impossible to realistically tailor your game plan around what the encounter could be. You're effectively putting the fate of your game into the hands of RNG and hoping the encounter isn't too impactful. This leads me directly into my next point, which is that TFT set 11 has a really bad balance problem, and it feels way worse than any sets from before. Alongside the horrifically imbalanced set mechanic of encounters, I believe the main reason for these issues is something that can be easily identified by looking at patterns from patches in previous sets, and that these mistakes are being repeated even though we now have 10 collective sets of balance data to refer to when making changes. In set 11 especially, balance thrashing and seemingly aimless changes are rampant. Over the last 3 patches, we've gone from 3 cost rerolls dominating the meta, to completely nuking these comps from orbit while buffing up the underperforming 4 costs, to finally, in the most recent patch, making another sweeping system change with the intention of lowering the emphasis on 4 costs through XP and shop odds changes, while also buffing up 3 costs in their trades. Where is the connective through line? Did they want reroll to be relevant, or do they want comps to cap entirely around higher levels and 4 cost carries? Did they want flexible play around various high-cost units to be incentivized, or do they want you to 3-star specific carries and cap around high-cost units later? The answer to these questions is obviously that they're intended to be equally viable, but that is demonstrably untrue when you look at the changes they are making. Looking at the 14.8 patch notes in depth, we went into this patch with a meta that was entirely oriented around either playing a Fortune line into Kai'Sa, or playing some kind of reroll comp. That could have been Duelist, the Powerpuff Girls comp referring to Zoe, Diana, and Soraka reroll, or even the dreaded Heavenly Yone comp. 4 costs as a concept this patch, with the exception of pretty much just Kai'Sa and her adjacent friends, were entirely unviable, with many of them being reduced to trait bot status or secondary item holders even in their titular verticals. Their solution to this problem was to, all in the same patch, reduce the odds of hitting 3 costs at level 7, nerf multiple of the rerolled traits in units, nerf Titan's Resolve, the item most closely associated with the dominance of Yone and Volibear, and finally buff every single 4 cost in the game, with the intention of completely rebalancing the meta and changing the balance paradigm between 3-star 3 costs and 2-star 4 costs. The outcome of this patch was self-evident. With the exception of Gnar, who received the compensation buff in exchange for the Titan's nerf, the entire meta revolved around flexible, high-cost lines including Heavenly with Kayn or Lee Sin, The same Fortune and Dakaisa lines from the previous patch, or most importantly, the extremely powerful and prevalent Porcelain line that included Ashe and Lysandra with varying support units and traits. Riot has succeeded in lowering the relevance of reroll comps, and now people were playing around 4 costs as intended. This came with the unintended byproduct, that being, with the 4 cost pool now being significantly dipped into due to the increased emphasis on this tier of unit, 3-star 4 costs became incredibly reliable to hit as a win condition relative to their power, so much so that it became uncomfortable for the devs to leave it in that state. So that brings us to this patch, where in response to this problem, Riot decides to nerf shop odds and XP prices at higher levels, in a greater value to the already successful level 7 shop odds change of the previous patch, but it doesn't stop there. They also decide to, understandably, completely remove some of the more impactful encounters towards the inflation of 3-star high-cost units. They then decide to completely rework Heavenly, directly leading to the death of some of the Heavenly-based flex comps of the previous patch. And finally, they decide to make trait and unit-specific balance changes with the intention of buffing up numerous reroll-oriented units. Oh, did I also mention that they also nerfed the already triple-nerfed Kayn? In one fell swoop, Riot has chosen to completely walk back the emphasis on 4 costs, with the Heavenly line being the most affected by the changes. At the same time, deciding to buff the previously successful but now struggling reroll lines. Do you notice the contradiction here? In 2 consecutive patches, they flip-flopped directly between 3 costs being broken and 4 costs being unplayable, to 4 costs being broken and 3 costs being unplayable, and now are trying to flip right back. The big issue here is that in every patch, Riot swings far too hard when they're making changes and ends up massively overshooting the problems they were trying to solve. For example, when 4 costs were being outshined by the 3 costs, they could have simply buffed the 4 costs in the way they did with the intention of leveling out their power level, but they instead decided to additionally nerf the 3 costs they were competing with at the same time, while also deciding to make the system change of making 3-star 3 costs harder to hit across the board with the XP changes. Instead of allowing the meta to settle and seeing how the higher powered 4 costs performed compared to their 3 cost counterparts, or even nerfing the 3 cost lines and waiting to see how the players adapted to the changes, they did all of it at the same time and ended up seesawing their power level directly to the under end of the spectrum. This is the TFT equivalent of a doctor seeing a patient for a cold and immediately sending them into open heart surgery. They're going way too far to solve a problem they could have just solved with way less effort. The combination of the inconsistent meta I just described alongside the very polarizing set mechanic have left players like me with a very unsatisfying game to play from patch to patch, and it makes me wonder what is going wrong with the development of set 11. Balance thrashing is not a new issue either, as the TFT balance team has struggled with overswinging on balance in older sets as well, consistently overshooting changes to various comps and being surprised when they suddenly take over the meta or disappear entirely. In set 3, patch 10.14 went down in history as patch 10.J4, due to the unbelievable overbuff given to Jarvan 4, the 1-cost Darkstar Protector. In one patch, they buffed J4's HP, AD, mana cost, and the attack speed granted by his cast, while also buffing Xayah, the easily rerolled carry unit alongside him, and Rakan, a 2-cost that shared traits with J4 and Xayah. In the following B patch, they were forced to revert the mana buff given to him, and in the patch following, they decided to nerf the attack speed granted by its ability to a value even lower than where it started, while also walking back Rakan's HP buff. According to Mortdog himself, this is one of, if not the largest single failure of a patch of all time. The meta was so polarized and Jarvan was so meta-warping on his own that it was likely the only time in TFT history where every single copy of a 1-cost unit was purchased somewhere in the lobby. Another time the dev team balanced thrash took place this time in set 7, but in this instance it was a massive overnerf. In patch 12.14, Riot wanted to improve the experience of playing high tiers of the Astral reroll trait. Following the rework to the 10-cost Dragon Aurelion Soul in the prior patch, they wanted him to reach his full potential as a capstone of the Astral vertical, with buffs to him and also the loot generated by 9 Astral. This came with the unintended side effect of players gaming the system by activating 9 Astral during their planning phase, rolling to generate the loot from the trait, and then, before the combat started, replacing their Astral units with their strongest board, generating tons of item components and other loot with no consequence to their combat power. This toggling of the Astral trait was a massive exploit, and clearly needed to be addressed, because it was artificially inflating the strength of Astral comps without ever making them actually run the suboptimal trait of 9 Astral. Therefore, in the B patch, they fixed the bug of Astral toggling, meaning that you actually had to play a combat with higher levels of Astral active in order for the loot to tier up in quality. This in and of itself would have been a good enough fix to the problem, but they decided to nerf ASOL and 9 Astral item drop chance in the same B patch, never allowing players to experience the power level of ASOL or 9 Astral without toggling being possible. Afterward, Acel fell back into the same obscurity he was in before 12.14 for most of the rest of the set, only returning to relevance in the mid-set of Set 7 because of huge trait changes. At the same time, 9 Astral remained completely pointless and unplayable, with Astral continuing to only be used as a low-cost reroll comp. Another lesser example in Set 7 was when in consecutive patches Riot massively overswung on the Legend comp in units, buffing both Volibear and Anivia, as well as the Legend trait itself, before needing to revert almost all of these changes in the follow-up V patch. Immediately following that disaster, they ended up buffing both Whispers and the 8-cost Whispers Dragon Siphon 3 times in the same patch, causing said dragon to rule the meta of 1212C before being nerfed in the follow-up patch. Some of the worst cases of balance thrashing actually continue to take place even in the era of modern TFT, with possibly the most egregious case of all time taking place in Set 8. In patch 13.1, Riot wanted to nerf the reroll mascots Supers line that was owning the meta, and did so in one of the most overkill ways that the TFT community had ever seen. At the time, the nerfs were absolutely warranted, but what they did was not simply a tap down, it was an execution. They nerfed both the Supers and mascot traits, while hard nerfing the units Galio and Yumi, leading to that comp being completely removed from the game. In the same patch, one of the most underutilized comps in the game at that time was the Mecha Prime Set comp. It was buffed multiple times, with the trait and Set himself receiving sizable buffs. Some other changes of the patch also benefited this comp, with buffs to Misfortune and nerfs to the item Giant Slayer directly impacting its playability. Even though its viability absolutely would have been directly impacted by the removal of the Supers Yumi reroll comp in the same patch, they opted to buff Set's comp anyway, becoming so strong that a B patch with reversions to multiple of the mech buffs was required. In the Plan C patch, another nerf was levied against Set, as well as nerfs to 2 of his most popular backline carry partners, MF and Samira. This C patch also notably featured buffs to Mascot, Yumi, and 2 of the Supers units because of how bad they were after the prior nerfs. 2 more modern examples of balance thrashing include in the Set 9 Taric patch, where in 13.14, Taric was massively buffed in numerous ways, demanding immediate follow-up nerfs in the B patch days later. Alongside in Set 10, when almost every single disco unit was buffed inside of a larger patch, before needing to be addressed for their excessive power in the follow-up patch. How is it possible that after so many historical cases of balance thrashing that we continue to have this problem to this very day? I could believe that in older sets, Riot's smaller team paired with a faster set turnover rate, that they would need to swing harder in order to help prevent metas from becoming stale during these shorter sets. Especially considering how a lot of their resources had to go towards prepping for mid-set expansions, I can understand how some of these mistakes go under the radar when shipping patches. But the TFT team is much bigger and better organized now, with entire teams dedicated to individual sets at a time, so there's far less of an excuse for these problems to slip through the cracks. Sets are longer now as well, so you have plenty of time to make changes and react to how the meta shifts before making follow-up improvements. You do not need to swing on everything all at once. I implore Riot to consider what I have to say and attempt to learn from these mistakes so as to avoid horrible metas like these in the future. If you're going to make sweeping changes to the meta, please be careful how many changes you make at the same time, and to what degree, before these changes ship, so we don't have more cases like these. Set 11 to me is a case of failing to learn from previous mistakes. I do not believe the TFT teams are messing up on purpose, but I don't believe we should continue to accept patches like these, especially not at the beginning of sets like this. I want to reiterate that TFT is a game that means a lot to me, and I really felt the need to get my thoughts out there. Even if no one ever sees this video, just knowing that I made it, and maybe I made some kind of difference, is enough to make it all worth it to me. Thanks everyone who watched to the end of this video, and please leave comments so we can get a discussion going. I'll be reading and responding to as many as I can. Have a great day.